A Conscience in the Clouds, the story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown. In the vast and brutal theater of the Second World War, the sky was a battlefield of its own. It was a realm of cold steel, roaring engines, and sudden death. It was a place where sworn enemies met in fleeting, violent encounters, often never seeing the faces of those they fought. But on a freezing winter's day in 1943, high above the scarred landscape of Germany, this brutal anonymity was shattered. What transpired was not an act of war, but a profound act of humanity. A moment of mercy so secret and so profound that its echoes would ripple across decades, eventually binding two enemies together as brothers. The Crippled Fortress, December 20th, 1943. For Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, a 21-year-old pilot from West Virginia, the mission was supposed to be his first successful bombing run. His chariot was the B-17 Flying Fortress, christened Ye Olde Pub. The target was an aircraft factory in Bremen, Germany. But the mission had turned into a nightmare. Swarms of German fighters, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, had descended upon the American bomber formation like wolves on a flock. Anti-aircraft fire, the dreaded flak, had torn the sky apart. Ye Olde Pub was savaged. Two of its 4 engines were failing. The hydraulic and oxygen systems were crippled. The plexiglass nose was shattered, exposing the crew to the sub-zero wind. The tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eckie Eckenrode, was dead, his blood frozen in the frigid air. Most of the 10-man crew were wounded, including Charlie Brown himself, who had a shrapnel wound in his shoulder. Their guns were silent, frozen, or out of ammunition. They were alone, separated from their formation, limping slowly back towards the North Sea, a wounded animal trying to find its way home. To any German pilot, they were the easiest of targets, a sitting duck, a guaranteed victory. For the crew of Ye Olde Pub, hope had all but vanished. Death was not a matter of if, but when. The hunter's gaze. On the ground, at a German airfield, Luftwaffe ace Franz Stigler was refueling and rearming his Messerschmitt Bf 109. He was already a seasoned veteran, an ace with 27 victories to his name. For him, shooting down one more B-17 would earn him the coveted Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. He had lost his beloved brother August, also a pilot, earlier in the war, and he fought with a cold, professional fury. When the alert sounded for a lone, damaged B-17 flying nearby, Stigler took to the sky. This was a pilot's dream. No escorts, no squadron to contend with. Just a simple, clean kill. He ascended rapidly, his powerful engine eating up the altitude. Soon, he had it in his sights. The crippled American bomber, flying so low and slow it seemed to be hanging in the air. He closed the distance, his thumb hovering over the cannon's trigger, ready to deliver the final fatal blow. This would be victory number 28, an unthinkable mercy. As Stigler maneuvered behind the bomber, preparing to fire, something stopped him. He was dangerously close, but his training screamed at him to finish the job. Yet he hesitated. He drew closer still, flying alongside the B-17's cockpit. He looked through the tattered fuselage and saw not a machine, but men. He saw the frantic, terrified eyes of the American crew, huddled together against the cold, some tending to the wounded. He could clearly see the lifeless body of the tail gunner, slumped in his turret. In that moment, a voice from his past echoed in his mind. It was the voice of his first commanding officer, Gustav Rodel, a man he deeply respected. Rodel had once told him, "You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy. You fight by the rules to keep your humanity." He had also said, "If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." Stigler looked at the shattered, defenseless plane. To him, shooting down this aircraft was no different from shooting at men in parachutes. It would be murder, not combat. The Knight's Cross meant nothing against the weight of his conscience. He was a fighter pilot, not a butcher. He made a decision that could have cost him his life if discovered. He eased his thumb off the trigger. The silent escort. Inside the cockpit of Ye Olde Pub, Charlie Brown saw the German fighter pull up alongside them. He closed his eyes, waiting for the hail of cannon fire that would tear them apart. But it never came. He opened them and saw the unthinkable. The German pilot was looking directly at him. He was gesturing, pointing downwards, then toward Sweden, trying to convince Brown to land his plane in neutral territory. Brown and his co-pilot were in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. Was this a trap? Was he toying with them? They shook their heads, determined to try and make it back to England. Seeing their resolve, Franz Stigler made another choice. He knew the bomber would have to fly over a heavily defended German coastal anti-aircraft battery. They would shoot it down in seconds. So he kept his Messerschmitt in formation on the bomber's wing. The German gunners on the ground would see one of their own fighters escorting the enemy plane and would assume it was a captured bomber being led to a German airfield. They would hold their fire. Stigler flew with them, a guardian angel in the guise of an enemy, until they were safely over the North Sea. Once clear of German airspace, he gave Charlie Brown a final crisp salute, banked his plane, and flew away, disappearing back into the clouds. Echoes of a single moment. Charlie Brown landed Ye Olde Pub at their base in England, the sole survivor of its squadron to return that day. When he reported the incident, he was ordered to silence. The High Command did not want stories that humanized the enemy. The war effort required a clear line between good and evil. So, Charlie buried the story, but the face of the German pilot and his inexplicable act of chivalry would haunt his dreams for the next 40 years. Franz Stigler never spoke of the incident either. Had his superiors found out he had let an enemy bomber escape, he would have faced a firing squad for treason. He went on to fly jets and survive the war, but the memory of the crippled bomber and his salute remained his most profound secret. Two men on opposite sides of the world were bound by a single silent moment in the sky, a search for a ghost. In the late 1980s, a retired Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Brown decided he could no longer live with the mystery. He needed to know who that pilot was and why he had spared them. It became an obsession. He searched military archives and attended pilot reunions, but found nothing. Finally, as a last resort, he wrote a letter to a newsletter for former Luftwaffe pilots in Germany. He told the story in detail and asked a simple question. I am searching for the man who saved my life on December 20th, 1943. Was anyone there? Months passed with no reply. Hope began to fade. Charlie thought he would take his secret to the grave. Brothers in arms. Across the Atlantic, in Vancouver, Canada, a retired businessman named Franz Stigler was reading that very newsletter. He saw the letter and froze. The date, the details, the crippled B-17. It was his story. After decades of silence, his secret had found him. He wrote to Charlie Brown. Dear Charles, he began. All these years, I have wondered what happened to that B-17. Did it make it home? I was the one. A phone call was arranged. When Franz heard Charlie's voice, he simply said, I was the pilot who escorted you. An emotional silence hung in the air, followed by tears of relief and gratitude from two old men who had once been mortal enemies. In 1990, they met in person. They embraced not as former foes, but as brothers. They learned they had more in common than they ever could have imagined. They spent years together, fishing, visiting each other's families, and sharing their incredible story with the world. Franz would tell Charlie, I didn't have the heart to finish off those brave men. I flew beside you as if I were trying to get you to surrender, but you wouldn't. I thought, good luck. You're in God's hands now. Higher call. The friendship between Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown lasted until their deaths in 2008, just months apart. Their story, immortalized in the book A Higher Call, stands as one of the most powerful testaments to the endurance of the human spirit. It is a reminder that even in the heart of the most savage conflicts, individuals are faced with choices. And sometimes, a single choice, to offer mercy when one is expected to offer death, can transcend the hatred of nations and the brutality of war. It is a story not of enemies, but of men who, in a fleeting moment, answered a higher call, the call of their own shared humanity.